The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any health concerns. Take care of yourself out there. Welcome to Unravelling, the podcast that sees the world through the lens of mental health. I'm Kurt White, a social worker and psychotherapist.
And I'm Mary Wilson, a journalist. And today we're continuing to talk about creativity. And we're going to be speaking about how creativity can be used as sort of an innate tool for self-discovery and even healing. And I wonder if in your work as a therapist, you've seen creativity play a role.
Oh, I absolutely have. Although that's kind of interesting because I think if I think back to my training, the word creativity probably didn't come up very much. And it's probably a bit of a loss that it didn't, actually, I think, because I think there are lots of ways to be creative in the therapeutic process.
It's something that is accessible to everyone, but many of us don't feel like we can take part sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think maybe there's a lot of barriers to it, and but I think there are some good neurobiological reasons to sort of think more about it than perhaps I was trained to. I had a mentor that used to talk about. She used to say, just almost kind of sing it. Words without feeling have no meaning. Very often, I think, in our lives, and sometimes you'll see it then in psychotherapy, we get sort of stuck. There's a stuckness quality to things. We stop experiencing things as one thing after another and start experiencing them as the same damn thing over and over again, right? I mean, that's sort of a joke in psychotherapy. That's when you come to therapy, when you don't have any movement or variety to things in your life. And why does that stuckness happen? And how do you get out of it? And it turns out that, it seems like that has much less to do with thinking and much more to do with a kind of a feeling, the sort of limbic system part of the brain where we're sort of hanging out in strong and even sometimes overwhelming emotions, or we're avoiding them, like in psychological trauma, the sort of most stuck things where you sort of get caught in a narrative or a moment from the past and you can't get out of it anymore.
So something's happening in your brain that can help you get free of that stuckness.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. How do we cultivate it? How do we learn how to actually cultivate it? How do we get maybe underneath the words in our lives, underneath the stories, underneath the same old kind of talking narrative, talking, thinking kind of thing that doesn't always lead anywhere? I think especially if you're experiencing a lot of distress, very often there's a kind of stuck rigidity to it. And it might be that by using different pathways in the brain to access some of the same material, you begin to get a little bit of this kind of play function where things can get a little bit loosened up and become a little bit less true and a little bit more flexible. And then we can begin to work with them again.
And our guest today uses music to try to accomplish that. Lane Gardner is a speaker, author, arts educator, singer-songwriter, and co-founder of Thread, a nonprofit that serves trauma survivors and communities in crisis. Lane is a fierce advocate for healing through creative expression and has spent nearly 30 years helping others uncover their creative brilliance.
Oh, that sounds so interesting. I can't wait to hear what they have to say.
Hi, Mary cutting in to thank you for listening and to ask that you please give us a good review and share with a friend if you're enjoying what you're hearing.
And we're also interested in hearing from you. If you have thoughts, feedback, suggestions for further topics that we might discuss, or anything you'd like to share, you can call us and leave a message at 1-802-258-POD3. That's 802-258-POD3, or send us an email or a voice memo at Unravel, UNRAVEL, at BrattleboroRetreat.org. Unravel at BrattleboroRetreat.org. We'll put that also in the show notes.
Back to the show. Lane, welcome to Unravelling. I'm so excited to talk with you all about your creative journey. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mary. I'm so thrilled to be here with you.
I know creativity for you really was a lifeline, especially starting at a young age. Can you tell me a bit about your early life? And I know it was shaped by some intense and traumatic experiences.
Yeah. My parents divorced when I was quite young. My father was a Vietnam veteran and came back from the war and had unbearable PTSD and just a lot of difficult challenges. So at age 4, I sort of was a little bit spiraling out where my family was sort of falling apart, and my mother kind of jumped right into looking for something to help her, and that ended up being a fundamentalist religious cult. And so at a very early age, she remarried, and I sort of was thrown into this space of very extreme views, quite frankly, and not in any way to disparage religion, but in this particular situation, it was meant to harm and control and manipulate people. So that, as you can imagine, had an enormous impact on my development as a young person. One thing I will say is I was born into a family of self-taught musicians. So I had this inherent experience as a young person, understanding the power of creativity and self-expression and gathering together with people. And so over the years, between the time that I was a child and the time that I went off to conservatory when I was 18, I found that I needed ways to escape, ways to feel better, ways to help myself not be completely crushed by the experience. And because I knew of creativity from my family, I began to seek it out. I began to find every opportunity I could, whether it be in a local choir or in a local community theater. I would play piano a lot. I'd play instruments. And I think what that did for me and what it helped me understand was that the arts could offer a sense of healing. It could offer a sense of survival and working through difficult things, even at such a young age. And I inherently knew that the arts and using singing and theater and all these different things were a way for me to maintain some sort of transmission with my true self, even though I was in a situation where I was being brainwashed, basically, to believe something different than who I really was. So the arts became a powerful tool, a survival tool for me. And then that's the book that I wrote called Lifeline. It ended up being a lifeline for me.
Mm. And it sounds like music was more than just sort of escaping reality. Did it help you sort of process what you were going through at that young age as well?
I think maybe not process. I think that came later on in my life as I became more of an adult. But I will tell you that I think that the most powerful thing about music for a young person, I think, is the way that it impacts your nervous system. Right? I'm sure many of us can relate to the fact that we often have anxiety. We often struggle with feeling a little bit out of sorts or dysregulated. And so I think, and I certainly did, I never quite knew what was coming around the corner in my life. And so I needed something to help me regulate my parasympathetic nervous system. And so singing and making music was always activating the frequencies and the soothing sort of vibrations within my nervous system, within my body. And that really became like a very practical tool on top of the notion that, using music and experiencing music can also help you to connect to your emotions, can help you to connect to other people in ways that perhaps words can't. And that's, I think, another really powerful part about music.
Mm. When did it sort of strike you that it wasn't just a passion of yours, but also a tool for healing?
I think I always knew unconsciously that I was using it as a tool, even though I, was sort of grew up with it and always sort of felt like it was a part of my identity. I started teaching when I was finishing up conservatory, little lessons here and there, little elementary school programs. And I think I realized very quickly how utilizing the arts could help to impact people's wellness and their sense of confidence and their sense of growth and development. And so over the course of those, I would say maybe, my 20s and early 30s, I kind of was just experimenting. And then I would say the big turning point for me was when I actually became a mom in my early 30s. I suddenly was overtaken by a lot of my trauma that I had run away from, that I had buried, that I had sort of, shuffled into the back of the closet. And becoming a new mom really brought a lot of that up for me. And I needed help. I needed to figure something out. And so I was working with a therapist, but B, I also realized that I needed to start telling my own story. And so I took up songwriting and I started learning how to share music and my story through my own creative expression. And I think that's really was sort of the turning point for me, where I was like, oh, wow, I can tell my story in a way that helps me process, sort of bring it into the light and see it in a way that's not as perhaps painful or devastating, because I'm using a creative form. I'm using a creative experience. There's a safe container there.
Mm. There's so much going on, you said, sort of in your nervous system while you're singing. Can you sort of walk us through what that feels like when you're preparing to sing, when you're singing, and then after?
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing that contributes to our ability to sing is the fact that we use our air, right? We use our breath. That is the facilitation of how anybody sings, not just a professional singer, but if you're humming while you're cooking dinner, or if you're singing in the shower, you're breathing in a way that is different from just your normal breath, right? When you're going through your day. So that already is actively impacting your nervous system, because you're taking deeper breaths. You're using your air in a more proactive way, right? So you combine that with the vibration, the sound waves that are happening when your voice is starting to make sound. That's sort of massaging and activating the body and the nervous system. And what that does is it allows it to calm and to feel more soothed, just by the science of it, let alone the joy and the freedom and the flow that we often experience when we're singing, when we're humming, right? We do that sometimes just because we're feeling like almost like checking out. We're in this flow state where we're singing, humming, and then we don't realize that what we're doing is we're actually helping ourselves to regulate in ways that maybe we weren't consciously trying to do.
Mm. You co-founded Thread. Can you tell me a bit about that nonprofit and how it helps people through the therapeutic arts?
In 2018, I was invited to work with the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, a few months after the horrific mass shooting at their school. And this was the first moment that I had been sort of invited to support a crisis scenario in this kind of a way. And so we went down there and we ran this collaborative songwriting program with some of the students in this Healing Through the Arts initiative, which was being sponsored by another nonprofit down there. And I think what we witnessed and what we saw was that the process of sharing both individual and collective stories in a group project was so powerful and so transformative that was the impetus after we finished that project to be like, wait a second, we can really meet the needs of a lot of different communities here who have shared traumas, shared experiences. And then that community can leave that workshop with a talisman or a reminder of their healing process, because they have this song that they wrote, that they created, that they recorded together, and they can go back and listen to that whenever they need it.
I can't imagine being in a room with those students, just knowing, what they had witnessed and been through. What was it like being in that room? And then how did things change throughout the songwriting workshop?
When we first got down there, we were driving up to the school. And I don't know if you remember from the news footage at that time, but there were All of the perimeter fences were covered with signs of support and love. And even just pulling up to the school, I just felt tears in my throat. It was just so palpable what had happened there. And so when we got in, started the project, the students were really very shell-shocked and very almost like ghosts. Like they really were very frozen in time. And so initially we started, just doing like musical activities with them, some hand drumming, some, brainstorming creative musical games. And little by little, you start to see them unfreeze, start to just try a little bit this, trust themselves a little bit to try that. And throughout the process, we're helping not only to support them to connect with one another, but also we're working with a licensed music therapist in the room as well. That's helping us to address any sort of triggers that might come up. And so as we went through the process, what the songwriting journey that I take people on is really, I have no agenda. It's really, I sort of help to facilitate how do we discover what we as individuals and as a group really need to talk about right now. So I take them through a bit of a lyrical brainstorming process. And it starts to emerge these themes, right? And that's why Thread is called Thread. It's the threads of our experiences, of each of our experiences. And we're learning how to weave those together into a collaborative project. And so as they did more of that, and as they shared in a creative way through writing lyrics, through singing, through hand drums that we were recording, they began to sort of transform and release what was these frozen emotions stuck inside of them. And they became so fluid and so expressive. And not only that, but we were building a beautiful song. And that was starting to give them a sense of skin in the game, right? Oh, this is my voice. This is my experience. And there's some ownership and there's some belonging to that, which was really beautiful. So I will tell you that in the course of the 4 short days that we were there, well, we were recording and working actually in one of the classrooms at the school itself, which was very powerful because the students had the opportunity to sort of reclaim what was a very sort of scary space after the shooting. And by the time we got to the end of the project, we had been able to record what we call like a scratch track of different parts. And we were going to take it back to our studio in New York and finish it. But we were able to share the song with the other students in the group. And these students were so transformed. They were grabbed each other by the hands. They stood each other up. They were so proud when they were listening. They were so elated at what they had been able to express and transform. And not only did it change them, but it changed the people in the room who felt like they also were witnessed and seen and heard and validated.
No one understands what I'm going through, but I just want the trust and honest trust. Just give it to me straight. I swear that I can handle it. I'm stronger than I look. Just tell me that I'm not okay. Just give it to
That's so beautiful. What is it about the creative process that can take the student from being shell-shocked, and why are they so able to open up as the days continue? What is it about creativity that allows them to do that?
I think that what happens when you bring creativity into a space is I think that there's a safety that begins to sort of take hold, right? Because you're not necessarily saying to people, tell me with words how you're feeling. You're saying, here's a drum, let's play. I don't know. I think the word is like accessible for healing because you can access parts of yourself that maybe you don't have words for. You can access parts of yourself that maybe you're afraid to have words for, but you can play it out or sing it out or express it in a way that allows for that sense of safety.
Mm. I know your work serves communities affected by trauma, including veterans, abuse survivors, those impacted by systemic inequalities. When you talk about healing, what really is that? What does it mean to impact people's wellness?
I would say that the leading edge for me whenever I am working with a community is I listen. And what I mean by that is I come in with my toolbox of how I have, developed facilitating a creative project. Each of those projects, each of those workshops are really determined by what each of those communities really need to express, what they need to share, what they sort of need to bring into the light, right? And so that is always sort of what determines the trajectory of the project, is what is on their heart and mind. And that will come out through the creative process, and they'll start to see that those are the things that maybe they weren't coming into the workshop saying, "Oh, I need to talk about my panic," or "Oh, I need to talk about this unresolved thing." But that's the beautiful thing about creativity, is that oftentimes it can help us get beneath the surface. It is born from the individuals. It comes directly from them. I'm not coming in and saying, "Hey, let's write a song about this terrible experience you had." I'm coming in saying, what needs healing, and through questions and activities and music making, that starts to reveal itself. It makes me just love people so much, because you see how resilient they are. You see how much they've been through, and how oftentimes people don't feel like they're allowed to express themselves or allowed to share what's hard. A lot of people, I think, feel they need to suck it up and just deal, right? Or push it down and just deal. And so the relief and the release that I get to witness makes me believe in the strength of the human soul. It makes me truly believe that human beings are still so capable, even through the most difficult things. We all just need the ability and the permission to say, I can express myself.
Mm. Can you tell us about maybe a specific time where you really saw someone transform over the course of learning about the creative process?
Yeah. When I was a young teacher, I was working with a young woman in a wheelchair. And she had, some physical issues and also some muscular issues. And so singing was very, very difficult for her just physically. But she desperately, desperately wanted to learn how to sing. And so, over the course of the time that I worked with her, I sort of, racked my brain to try to find helpful ways to help her work with what was holding her back, but still help her to be able to use her sound and her air and all of that. And she also was struggling with feeling, discriminated against, right? Feeling being made fun of. Like, anyone with a disability can absolutely relate to how harsh people are. And so over the course of those months, we just kept trying, and she tried so hard, and she would get so frustrated, and she would sometimes her body would shake from just trying so hard, and she'd slump back in her chair, but she always came back, and she always kept trying. And I would say after about 6 months, one day she came into our lesson, and she opened her mouth and she sang. All of a sudden, all of the work that we had been doing just came together in this beautiful moment. And it was her voice, and it was her sound, her ability to express herself in a way that she desperately needed to. And she sang, and I cried, and she cried. And it was one of these moments of human triumph.
And it's not seeing those results right away. This was months and months of practice.
Yeah. And I think, in her situation, I think it was a bit of an extreme situation, right? Like, there were physical and muscular challenges that we had to figure out. But I think for anybody, whether it's something that feels like you can get it quickly or it takes a while, I always say to people that I work with, like, let's approach it with curiosity, right? Let's not approach it with, I need to get from A to B. If we approach it from curiosity's sake, what might I find out? What might I experience? What might I discover? What might I uncover, right? And I think from that, then it allows us to take the pressure off of the time. And we say like, oh, well, if I don't figure this out within a couple of lessons, then I'm no good at this, right? And I don't think that's the case. I think it's that allowing that curiosity to lead us not only will help us develop what we are trying to learn how to develop, but I think it also allows us to discover so much more about what we have within us. And that's the gift of the process as well.
Is there sort of a major change you would like to see with maybe how we all view creativity and healing?
I think that right now, more than ever, people are much more willing to try something that maybe seems a little bit outside the box. I will tell you, when we first started Thread, we launched it and the pandemic hit a couple months later. And so I think there was this experience of like, we just need to stick with what we know. Everything around us is falling apart. And I think there was a resistance and there was a reluctance to considering creativity as an addition to our mental wellness routines. Now I think we're at a point where and again, this is a harsh generality. I'm not speaking for everybody, but like, I think that, we're a lot more ready to say, okay, I might be able to try something different. I might be willing to try something else. I might be interested in going within, right? I think a lot of times we're always looking outside of ourselves. Tell us how to feel better. Tell us what to do. What's the next pill that's going to help, right? And all of those systems are wonderful and they help us and we need them. But I think we also are more willing to say, okay, actually, what do I have that I can rely on? Things that we're not familiar with often scare us, right? And I think that the more that we can educate ourselves about that the unknown doesn't necessarily mean bad, I think we're getting more courage and more willingness to step out of our comfort zones, and because we need it, right? And I think a lot of us know that we need something more, and so we're willing to try.
Lane, thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom today. I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed being with you today.
And we want to thank Lane again for speaking with me. I had such a great time with her. Kurt has been listening along. And Kurt, in your many years in the therapy world, have you seen the arts play a role in some of these healing exercises?
Yes, this is all, in my mind, at least a part of a series of really long traditions and disciplines in their own right. Art therapists and music therapists, dance movement therapists, things that I have encountered in many different ways with my time in the field, including, very interestingly, sometimes supervising on the counseling side, dance movement therapy interns. There were students from a school nearby that has quite a distinguished program in that. And I learned a lot from those students about very different ways of working than I was trained in, right? Getting people up and moving and doing things, right? I was always told, put thoughts and feelings into words rather than actions. And they'd be like, nope, get up and put them into actions and do this and do that and engage the creative side of yourself. And I just find that very fascinating. So many different ways of being able to work, but I always find it so moving, and so surprising sometimes, and working with folks with such really significant trauma, like in some of the cases that Lane spoke about.
Yeah, the movement, it really makes sense, even when you just want to clear your head or you're stressed about something. I find going on a jog or taking a walk, it's totally transformative.
Oh, it's true. Albert Ellis, even one of the sort of founders of the sort of cognitive behavioral therapies, rational and motive behavioral therapy, he sort of was always trying to get people to understand how irrational they were. And he would do things like make you sing a song about your fears, for example, right? If you have to sing all the things you're afraid afraid of to the tune of Mary Had a Little Lamb. It sort of takes the edge off, you know what I mean? It just sort of seems to naturally do something different, neurobiologically. I'd really like to explore that at some point, by the way, like to really come back to it and get to the root of what the heck is going on here, at the sort of deeper neurobiological level that makes some of these creative methods so powerful. But next time, we're going to be talking about things in kind of a different direction. We're going to have a pair of episodes that's all about what is it like to live and work in groups? What is this about, right? We often think about people as individuals, but we often live in groups. So I'm really excited for this because I have such a professional life in the world of group and group therapy, and I'm excited to talk to some really interesting experts about that.
This is the world you inhabit, so I'm very interested in learning more.
That's right. We live in groups, so let's talk about them, study them a little bit, and maybe we'll have some insights about this crazy world we live in.
Very good. See you next time.
Unravelling is brought to you by Brattleboro Retreat. Our producers at Charts and Leisure are Andrew Atkin, Hans Butow, and Jason Oberholzer.
And you can find us on social media by searching Brattleboro Retreat. Brattleboro Retreat is committed to exploring diverse perspectives on mental health. While we invite hosts and guests to share their insights, the views expressed are their own and do not necessarily reflect the policies or positions of the hospital or its staff.